Welcome into the show today. Thank you for making this Minnesota Vikings podcast by Minnesota Timothy a part of your day. I'm feeling good this morning. I'm feeling almost entirely 100% back. And I'm ready to rumble. And on this podcast, I'm going to tell you why the Minnesota Vikings are not interested in a sign and trade revolving around Sam Darnold. But first, I want to ask a question. What would you do? This happened the other day. I was taking a poop. By the way, this podcast is 100% honest 100% of the time. I was taking a poop. My 2-year-old daughter enters the bathroom. She enters my stratosphere as my 1-year-old boy is playing on the floor. And she comes into the bathroom. She's fully potty trained. Sleeps at night in underwear. So she knows the difference between, having to go pee and not having to go pee. Faking it, pretending, and actually having to go pee. And when you walk into a bathroom or you hear running water, what happens? You have to go pee. Your body signals somehow go into fight or flight, and you have to go pee. Well, I'm sitting there. I have to go poop. And she all of a sudden tells me that she has to pee. What am I supposed to do in this situation? I'm sitting on the pot. I'm in a situation where this bowel movement could erupt at any point in time. And then she tells me she has to go pee-pee. So what I did is I clenched my left cheek and my right cheek together. I put her on the pot, and I hoped and prayed that she would pee immediately so I could get her off the pot and I could sit back down immediately. And boy, it was risky, but man, it worked. She peed, she got off the pot, I got on, and it was one of those immaculate receptions in the bathroom. You couldn't have drawn it up any better. I mean, I wish she hadn't had to go pee in the first place. But if you are going to create a situation like that, if she pees her pants, we're talking about full-on meltdown, embarrassment. And if I poop on the floor, well, that's just gross. But the poop stayed, she peed, I got back on the pot, and everything worked out flawlessly. Thank you for that story. Thank you for your time. All right, let's dive into the real story. The Minnesota Vikings and Sam Darnold. There's been a lot of speculation, and there will continue to be speculation. I don't really know why. Well, I do know why. Because people like to talk about stories, and there's different reports from different people. But you look at the consistent reports from the real insiders, and you listen to this podcast, and I'll tell you exactly what's going on. The Minnesota Vikings are not bringing back Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold is going to sign somewhere else in free agency. And with Sam Darnold exploring options and with Kevin O'Connell being consistent in his recent statements saying that Darnold has earned the right to be the marquee free agent, a lot of people have gone into, should the Minnesota Vikings sign and trade Sam Darnold so that they can get pieces back on their roster and draft picks. And the reason why that's not going to happen is for multiple reasons. One, Sam Darnold is not going to get you a massive haul in return. Sam Darnold is not going to fetch the Minnesota Vikings a first-round pick like Russell Wilson did in his trade to the Denver Broncos. The Seattle Seahawks got multiple first-round picks for him. They got a haul. But Sam Darnold is not Russell Wilson coming off of Super Bowl wins or a win and Super Bowl appearances. Now, Russell Wilson was trending downwards in his career when the trade happened, but he still had the Lombardi. He still had another Super Bowl appearance. And he still had the experience, and he just had to unlock him again. And going to Sean Payton and the Denver Broncos after a year he played with Nathaniel Hackett, it just seemed like it was going to work. But it didn't. And it became one of the worst trades in NFL history. Sam Darnold, if the Vikings traded him to the Raiders are not going to send a first-round pick back to the Minnesota Vikings. Probably not even a second overall pick. And the problem that this creates is if you do sign and trade him to a tag and trade, if you pursue a tag and trade with Sam Darnold, then if you're going to trade him, you have to take players back, because a team that wants to take on Sam Darnold and that contract in a sign and trade is not going to want to eat that entire salary. So if you trade Sam Darnold, then the Las Vegas Raiders are going to have to give the Minnesota Vikings some pieces to try to make that trade work. Now, salary cap, it probably works, but the Raiders probably want to dump some of those contracts so that they're not on their table along with Sam Darnold's contract as well. So when you put this all together, the Minnesota Vikings are not interested in a return from the Las Vegas Raiders, which it appears by all measures that is the landing spot for Sam Darnold. Seems like that's the place that is the favorite to land him. You bring in Chip Kelly as offensive coordinator. You've got a new head coach. It just seems like that's where it makes most sense. So Sam Darnold is likely to go to the Raiders, and the Minnesota Vikings are not going to put a contract number on him, a tag and trade, so that the Minnesota Vikings can get pieces from the Raiders. It's just not going to happen, because the Raiders, in almost every single category, are one of the worst organizations in the NFL. And the record stunk last year. So how many pieces of the Raiders organization do you really want? The whole point of getting rid of Sam Darnold is so that you can have cap space and do with that money what you want. You don't sign and trade Sam Darnold just to fill up that cap space that Sam Darnold would have filled up. The Vikings want the flexibility to sign guys that they want to sign, to trade for guys that they want to trade for, and not be forced to deal him to the Raiders and get back whoever the Las Vegas Raiders have to offer. The Vikings want their guys and they want their flexibility because they've worked hard at this for years. They've wanted this cap space situation since 2022 when Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah was hired and Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks and these old-timers are still on the Minnesota Vikings roster eating up these massive salaries because of what Rick Spielman gave them late in his tenure with the Minnesota Vikings. And now that the Minnesota Vikings have this cap space, they're not about to trade Sam Darnold for some complimentary pieces from the Raiders or from some other organization just to ruin the cap space that they worked so hard to get. So don't expect a sign and trade. And I guess you're letting Sam Darnold walk for nothing, but are you really? Because if you let him walk for nothing, you have all of this salary cap flexibility moving forward where you can bring in the top-notch free agents and you can do with that money what you want. You can re-sign key players on the Minnesota Vikings defense, offense, and bring in the biggest of free agents to fill in your holes on the offensive line, on the defensive line, and on the secondary. The Minnesota Vikings have holes in several places, and they're big holes. Secondary, offensive line, defensive line. Look at why the Eagles just won the Super Bowl. Their offensive line was spectacular. and their defensive line was stellar, and their secondary was very good. The Minnesota Vikings have holes in all of those categories. So you trade Sam Darnold, you get back some of these pieces while you're eating up a big chunk of that salary cap space that you want to pay DJ Reed with, that you want to pay Trey Smith with. So the Minnesota Vikings are going to let them walk, and they are going to utilize their money the way that they want. Maybe you could get a third or fourth round pick for Darnold, but how valuable is that? How many third or fourth round picks have been successful players under Kwesi's leadership in his 3 years as Minnesota Vikings general manager? Most likely 0, because I looked it up the other day. Only 4 players in his 3 drafts so far with the Vikings have been impactful players. So, how valuable is a third round pick? Not very valuable. I hope I answered your questions today. I thank you for watching and listening to this podcast. The Minnesota Vikings are not going to tag and trade Sam Darnold. Thank you for watching. Hit that subscribe button. And thank you for making this podcast a part of your day.